So how do we know that we're actually measuring what it is that we think we're measuring? And that's where we get into validity. So validity is the concept that what you're measuring is what you actually think you measured. The true score is what you're measuring, the actual true score that you're set up to measure. So the degree of match between your conceptual definition, that is your true score, and your operational definition, that is the measure that you're using. So does the measure that you're employing actually measure the construct that it's supposed to measure? That is what is at the heart of construct validity. Does your measurement score actually reflect the true score? That's what we're asking when we're looking at validity. So in any measure, you're going to want high reliability and high validity. You're going to want the two of them together as much as you can. So if you remember back to our look at operational definitions of variables, when you're measuring something like depression, the conceptual definition, the typical dictionary definition, that represents the true score, the true variable. So when we're measuring depression, we want to know how much of a condition of general emotional dejection and withdrawal does this person have. We want to know how much sadness, greater and more prolonged than warranted by any objective reason, does this person have. We want to know what's their true score on this concept, this idea. We do that by using a measurement scale, such as the Beck's Depression Inventory. And that is a measurement scale that, for example, has high construct validity. So we're going to see why it has high construct validity, how we know it has high construct validity. But basically what this high construct validity means is that this measure, this tool, actually measures this. That's what high validity means, high construct validity. It means that this measurement score is actually measuring this. This is the bullseye we want to hit, and this score is getting close to the bullseye. So that's what we mean by high construct validity. If we said that we're going to measure depression, and the way that we're going to measure it is we're going to measure it in height in inches. That is my operational definition for depression. Notice that this would have extremely high reliability. So if you measured my depression using this operational definition, and you measured me today, you would measure me and it would be 6'4". If you then measured me a week from today, you would measure me again and it would be 6'4". And you would say to yourself, wow, that is really high test retest reliability, right? I measured him before, I measured him after, exact same score. Super high test retest reliability. If you used inter-rater reliability, if you said, Dr. Borshak, can you measure Dr. Yudicevich? And she said, all right, yeah, 6'4". And you said, Dr. Ritchie, can you measure Dr. Yudicevich? And she said, yep, all right, 6'4". You'd say, oh wow, two raters got exactly the same answer. Super high inter-rater reliability. But notice that it's not measuring what it is that we want to measure. So this one here, that has low construct reliability. So even though this is very reliable, low construct validity. So even though this is very reliable, it's not valid because this does not measure this. This is hitting a bullseye, but not the bullseye on this target. It's hitting something else entirely. So that's what we mean by high construct versus low construct validity. All right, any questions on the basic ideas of high versus low construct validity? All right, so once again, we need ways of assessing validity. We need ways of assessing this construct validity because we don't know exactly where the bullseye is. That's what we're trying to measure. So how do we know if we're completely missing it? How do we know that we have low construct validity or that we're actually hitting it, that we have high construct validity? And much like with reliability, there are different ways to assess it. Now with construct validity, there's a number of different ways to assess it. All of these are useful in different circumstances. All of these will be used in conjunction with each other to increase the validity of a particular measure. So let's take a look at a few, and we'll start it off with the Beck's depression inventory. So the Beck's depression inventory is known to have high construct validity, and it's known to have high construct validity because it scores high on various measures of construct validity, like face validity, and we'll start off with that one, face validity. And this one is the most sort of transparent one, and it's also the one that's oftentimes the least useful, right? So we'll talk about why, but it is a measure of validity. And face validity is simply where the content of your measure looks like it's measuring the underlying construct. It's where your measurement score looks like it's measuring your true score. So it's called face validity because on the face value or the face of it, it looks like your measurement is actually measuring the desired true score, the actual construct. So if you took a look at Beck's depression inventory, even with a very superficial knowledge of what depression is, you could assess Beck's depression inventory as having high face validity. So if you look at the questions here, question A indicate, so if you've ever taken Beck's depression inventory, what you do is for each of these statements here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you simply circle which number corresponds to how you feel. So question A, I do not feel sad. I feel sad. I am sad all the time and I can't snap out of it. I am so sad or unhappy that I can't stand it. Question D, I get as much satisfaction out of things as I used to. I don't enjoy things the way I used to. I don't get real satisfaction out of anything anymore. I am dissatisfied or bored with everything. C, I do not feel like a failure. I feel I have failed more than the average person. As I look back on my life, all I can see is a lot of failure. I feel I am a complete failure as a person. So all of these questions look like they have stuff to do with depression. And that's all face validity is. It's whether or not your questions look like they're measuring what it is that you decided to measure. So that would be that would have high face validity for depression. Things that don't have high face validity. Basically, any BuzzFeed or where did I get this one from? Yeah, this is BuzzFeed. Any BuzzFeed quiz has almost no validity whatsoever. So here we have build a taco, and we'll tell you which Winter Olympic sport you'd be really good about. All right. On the look of this, if you said to somebody, "Do you think this looks like a good measure of Winter Olympic athletic skills?" People would say, "No, it's got nothing to do with athletic skills. It's got nothing to do with the Winter Olympics. This has very low face validity." If somebody ever said, "Do you think this is a good measure of whether somebody can be a downhill skier?" They'll say, "No, that doesn't look right at all. That's low face validity." All right, so that was face validity. Next one, content validity. And content validity is when the content of the measure is linked to the content that defines the construct. So it's when the stuff that's in the measure correctly links to the stuff that we know about what it is that the concept is measuring. So once again, we go back to Beck's depression inventory, and we can see that it has high content validity. So things we know about depression. We know depression has to do with sadness. That's one of the contents of depression. And lo and behold, there's the question on sadness. It's assessing sadness. We know that there's a hopelessness in depression, that things aren't going to change. And lo and behold, there's a question about hopelessness. We know that people who are depressed don't get satisfaction out of their everyday experiences. One of the things that occurs is that oftentimes they're not very sad, but they're not very happy. They go out and do things that used to bring them enjoyment, and they're like, "This does nothing for me." That's content in depression. That is something we know about depression, and lo and behold, it's assessing that. So if you had a list of everything that depression was about, you could check off just about everything on that list when you go through Beck's depression inventory. So it's got high content validity. On the other hand, build a taco and we'll tell you what winter sport you'll be good at. That's very low content validity. So if you go to a coach and you say to them, what makes an Olympic winter athlete a great Olympic winter athlete? They'll say things like, oh, they have a lot of balance. You can go through here, asks nothing about balance. You can say things like, oh, they'll have a lot of anaerobic capacity. You'll go through this, nothing about anaerobic capacity. Basically, nothing about what it takes to be an athlete is going to be in this test, low content validity. Yep.
So obviously, like those things aren't accurate, but sometimes in a weird way they are. How do they do, like the astrological signs type thing, or it's like you can guess what you look like based on these questions, and sometimes they're very accurate. How do they do that? Like some of them aren't as BS as that.
Well, I mean, there's a few things that's going on in that way. Number one, oftentimes the final outcome of these will sound accurate, but it'll really be general. So that's known, I think it's called the P.T. Barnum effect, where there are certain statements that sound like, people really know what I'm like, but in reality it's true of everybody. So if you say stuff like, you know what, you took this test, and I can tell from this test that you're a truthful person, but occasionally you'll bend to truth, most people will sit there going, oh wow, that's me. But that's everybody, right? And if they say something like, you're a really loyal friend, I can tell you're a really loyal friend, but there have been times in the past when that loyalty's been tested, you might say, oh my gosh, how did they know that? It's like it's true of everybody, but it sounds specific. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that you do 20 of these. One of them is bound to get it right. Just randomly, if you do enough of them, you'll end up with the correct answer. And then the last one that I've found with some of my experience is that occasionally you'll just go back and change your answers until you get the one that you want. So if they're like, oh, what Avenger are you? And you're like, oh, I like this, I like this, I like this, I like this. Answer. And you're like, Hawkeye? No. And you're like, I like this. Until you get Captain America or whoever you really want. So there's that as well. But, if they actually do, if it can be tested to show that yes, it is reliable, yes, it is measuring what it is, there's no reason why some of these can't indicate what you're truly like. There's no reason why it can't get to a true score. It's just that in reality, very few of them actually do.
I know they ask, because like the Facebook ones, that's when we do religiously.
Yeah.
We do them over FaceTime, and sometimes we're just like, wait.
Yeah.
Something's not right. Like guessing the astrological sign thing, but I guess like everyone has their characteristics, but like how true can that actually, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But some of them are weird. Like I guess what I looked like because of the ice cream sundae I built. It said brown hair, blue eyes.
It's possible.
They're looking.
Yeah, well then your camera might be on. So you might want to put like a little post-it note over your camera. All right. So assessing construct validity. We just took a look at content validity. Does it measure what we know about a concept, right? So depression is more than just sadness. Does your depression measure more than just sadness? Being good at an Olympic sport has a bunch of different features to it. Does your measure those different features? If it does, high content validity. If it doesn't, very low content validity. All right, next one for construct validity. Predictive validity. Actually, that's exactly what we were just talking about. Predictive validity is whether or not the scores that you measured predict behavior at a future time. So the scores that you measured on your measure, will that predict behavior on that variable, on that criterion, measured at a future time? So if you give somebody the Beck's Depression Inventory, it can identify people that are at risk for depression. It can actually tell you that if somebody here, if you give them their Beck's Depression Inventory, it'll tell you if they're at risk, if they scored high enough that they could develop depression. It can predict what's going to happen in the future for depression. So that's predictive validity, whether or not it can actually predict what's to come on that particular variable. If you score incredibly low on the Beck's Depression Inventory, that's a good prediction that you're not going to develop depression anytime soon. So it can actually say what's going to happen at a future time. take this taco test, and it's not going to predict whether you're going to be winning medals, at the next Olympic. This has no predictability whatsoever. It might tell 100,000 people that they're going to be good at downhill skiing. Not one of them is going to win a medal at downhill skiing. Low predictability, low construct validity. All right, assessing construct validity. Concurrent validity. So predictive validity is to predict something in the future, right? Predict a behavior in the future. Concurrent validity is to predict a related behavior now. So that's where it's concurrent validity, because it's done concurrently. So are the scores on this measure related to criterions that are measured at the same time? So things that are related and measured at the same time. So for example, depression is not the same as job satisfaction, but it's related to job satisfaction. We know that depression is related to job satisfaction. So if this is truly measuring depression, then its scores should be lined up with the scores from job satisfaction. They should be correlated together. You score high on depression, you should score low on job satisfaction. You score low on depression, you should score higher on job satisfaction. The two of those should concurrently match up. They should concurrently predict each other. So again, it's not predicting some score in the future. It's predicting if you give somebody the Beck's Depression Inventory and you give them the Spector's job satisfaction survey, their scores should line up with each other in a predictable way. One of the scores that actually, or measures that actually is predictive of success in the Olympics, that actually does have validity, is this Y balance scale over here. So the way that this works is that you stand on the center block, and then the physical therapist person that's assessing you will push these out at various directions, and you should be able to balance and step to the side and step to the other one there. So that is measuring your balance. That is actually highly predictive of your ability in speed skating. So speed skaters will kill this particular measure. This measure here has no concurrent validity whatsoever with this measure here. So if you score high on that balance measure, who knows what kind of taco you're going to score? There's no relationship between the two. You can measure the two at the same time, but there's no relationship between the two. So that means that they have low concurrent validity, which means that they're not related. They're not measuring the same related idea, in this case, the idea of being good at speed skating. All right, we got, I think, two more. We got convergent validity. Convergent validity is where scores on the measure are related to other measures of the same construct or similar constructs. So it's basically a ramped up version or jacked up version of concurrent validity. Convergent validity is where you have one measure of something and you have another measure of something, and they seem to be converging on the same spot. They seem to be converging on the same true score. So this is one of the reasons why there are so many different measures for the same construct. So Beck's Depression Inventory is by far the most widely used measure of depression, but there are other measures of depression. And if Beck's Depression Inventory is measuring depression, and the Zung SDS test is measuring depression, then those two should have high convergent validity. They should agree. If Beck's Depression Inventory tells you you're depressed, Zung's SDS should tell you you're depressed. If Zung's SDS tells you you're not depressed, Beck's Depression Inventory should tell you you're not depressed. They should converge on the same bullseye, indicating high, in this case, convergent validity. Build a taco and we'll tell you which Olympic sport you're really good at does not converge with people's performance at the U.S. Alpine Championships qualifying for the Olympics. So if you do well here, you are not necessarily going to choose the same taco shell as somebody else that does well here. And if you do poorly here, you're not going to choose a different meat topping than somebody else that does poorly there. The answers that you get here do not converge with the answers that you get here. So this has low. These two would have low convergent validity. And what that means is that at least one, but maybe both of those, is not measuring what they think they're measuring. All right, and I believe this is probably the last one, discriminant validity. And this is the opposite idea from convergent validity. So whereas convergent validity, you're looking at two related measures to point into the same direction. In divergent or discriminant validity, you're looking at two unrelated measures to point in different directions. You're looking at two unrelated measures to point to two different bullseyes. So if I was assessing Beck's depression inventory for discriminant validity, it would have very low discriminant validity with the Zung SDS because these two are measuring the exact same thing. So you would expect they would have high convergent validity, very low divergent validity because they're measuring the exact same thing. But both of these have divergent validity, very different answers than the WACE IQ scale. So if you measure people's depression and then you measure people's IQs, the two constructs you're trying to measure, one of them is depression, one of them is intelligence. One bullseye is over here, one bullseye is over here. And the fact that those tests point in different directions to different bullseyes means that they have high discriminant validity. If they agree with each other, then for all we know, Beck's depression inventory is really just an intelligence test. It's not measuring depression. If it's agreeing with the IQ scores, then it's really measuring IQ, and it's not measuring depression. So the discriminant validity is where it doesn't agree with measures that it shouldn't have anything to deal with. Build a taco and we'll tell you which winter sport you're really good at. That's about measuring which winter sport you're good at. Can you pass this Mexican food test? That is measuring your Mexican food knowledge. So we got the winter sport bullseye over here. We got the Mexican food bullseye over here. If there is agreement between these two tests, then what that means is that they're not measuring those two different bullseyes, they're measuring the same bullseye. So if you don't have high discriminant validity, if it turns out that you're actually measuring the same thing, once again, it means that one of you is wrong. You're actually measuring a construct that you thought you weren't measuring. All right, so those are the different forms of validity. And we mentioned, I forgot to mention this before, but all of these you would want to assess, all of them pretty much, to make sure that you are measuring the thing that you think you're measuring. But the one that can be left out, and oftentimes is left out, is face validity. So let's end today's class with a little bit of a critical thinking exercise. Face validity is whether your test looks like it's measuring the construct that you're measuring. So when would you want a measure that has extremely low face validity? When would you want a measure that does not look like it's actually measuring the construct? Any ideas yet?
If you didn't want the subjects to know what you were measuring.
Exactly. So if you don't want your subjects to know what it is that you're measuring, then you actually want really, really low face validity. So something with high face validity, if you're doing research in stereotypes and you put together a measurement of stereotypes and racial biases. You could have a very highly valid survey if question number 1 was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how racist are you? 1, not racist at all. 10, completely racist, right? That has extremely high validity. You're actually measuring racism in that case. But you're not going to get any real answers because the face validity is too high. So nobody is going to sit down there and say, you know what, I'm probably like a 9, I would imagine, on this, right? They're all going to say exactly what they think the experimenter wants to hear. I'm a 0, right? I'm not racist at all. So when you're dealing with things that people might not want to admit about themselves, you have to ask them, you have to design a measure that has very low face validity. And I remember when I was reading about this, one of the things that you do is you basically ask about questions that don't necessarily have high face validity, but still measure that content validity and have that kind of concurrent validity. So for example, if you're looking at stereotypes, especially let's say gender stereotypes or minority stereotypes, you can't have questions with high face validity. So if you say something like in your survey, if you were the owner of a company, would you not hire somebody because they're African American? Everybody knows the answer to that. Everybody knows you write, no, I would not take that into consideration. I don't see race. I wouldn't have that a consideration. If you were hiring for a company, would you prefer to hire a male employee versus a female employee? Everybody knows the answer to that. No preference, whoever's the best for the job. So you can't ask questions like that with high face validity if you want to get to the true measure of internal biases. So what they do is they ask questions with lower face validity. So they'll ask things like, well, on affirmative action, do you believe that some people benefit unfairly from affirmative action? And that people are much more likely to say, oh yes, I think there are certain groups that are, benefit, very unfairly. I think it's unfair to certain other people. And that has that content validity, that has that concurrent validity, that gets you to a true measure of the biases that an individual might have. So that's the one, just so that you know, if you're ever designing a test, you might not want face validity. It's totally fine to have it. IQ scores are highly valid, and they have super high face validity. Nobody has ever taken an IQ test, and at the end of it, the person says, oh, by the way, I was testing your intelligence. And they're like, what? No, really? All those math questions and logic questions and puzzles that I put together was testing my intelligence? They know it. It's high face validity. If you don't know it, then you should fail the IQ test, I guess. But anyways, they know it is high face validity. So high face validity sometimes is completely acceptable, but this is the one that you don't always want. These ones you always want. So these ones are always in play, but that one you might not actually want to have. All right, any final questions, comments? All right, so that is it for today.